team, personnel, anybody I'm missing. Thank you all so much for being here today. We're moving on to the portion where we're going to talk about the fiscal year 18 budget and start to get into the fiscal year 19, some of the issues that we're going to be looking at, some of the projects that we'd like to attempt to fund somehow and bring online in next fiscal year. So it'll mostly be a review of where we are up to this point in 18 and then kind of plant some seeds for fiscal year 19 moving forward. As with any type of a presentation that we give, we want to start off with our mission and values. As we move forward through this budget presentation, you'll hopefully be able to see how we're looking at projects that tie into specifically our mission and our values as well. We've gone over this before, but I'm just going to do it again. We lead with trust and respect to provide a vibrant, secure community for all. That's our mission statement. That's what we're here to do as a staff, as a community here at the City of Sweetwater. The way that we want to do that is by utilizing our values of professionalism, integrity, continuous improvement, and teamwork. So I know with all successful PowerPoint presentations, you kind of start off by saying, this is what I'm going to tell you. You move on by saying that, and then you wrap up by saying, this is what I told you. So this is what I'm going to tell you. Is we're going to talk about, to begin with, all funds. I'll just give a brief overview of all funds, inclusive of the city organization. We'll hone in on the general fund and the water utilities fund next. I'll bring up other items of interest, which will include our self-insurance fund and the EMS fund and those types of things. We'll review the budget calendar, and really that kicks off today with this presentation on June 12th, and then allow for questions and answers that any of y'all have for myself or the staff. I do want to lead with this. I just threw this slide together this morning. This is information that I've had for a little while now that a colleague of mine in the city management profession sent to me a little bit ago. This is from Wikipedia. These are what are called micropolitan statistical areas. There's 43 in Texas. There's over 500 in the United States. You see many of the cities that maybe we have family or friends in or have traveled to or through, and we all live here in Sweetwater. The way that is, these are defined, these are areas of the state of Texas that are over 10,000 population, but not over 50,000, so between 10 and 50, and really don't rely on a city, aren't a suburb of a larger city where they can kind of rely on their economy. These are cities on an island is what I'm referring to them as. And there's 43 of them. I was born in Alice, so I kind of grew up in a similar type of area, and now find ourselves living and raising our family here in Sweetwater. So personally, I've had some good experience in living and working in cities on an island. We can't rely on another city's economy, on people coming into town and shopping at our big shopping centers and those types of things, dropping their money here and leaving. We've got to take care of ourselves. So everything that we do, everything that we budget for, the decisions that we make are independent of us being part of a larger system. I mean, you get down to the valley, you see the cities in the Metroplex, in Houston, and the larger cities. They're all dependent on Austin doing well. They're all dependent on San Antonio or Houston or Dallas or Fort Worth or McAllen doing well. We don't have that luxury here in Sweetwater. Neither do 42 of these other cities on this list. They've got to make decisions, and we're on that same deal with them. They've got to make decisions for themselves because they simply can't rely on other economies and kind of leech off of them. The decisions they make have to be in the best interest of them and not anybody else. So I'll just kind of start off this presentation with that. Food for thought. Moving on to the numbers part of it, fiscal year 18 revenues for all funds. You see on the taxes, we got about 7.1. Charges for services, the majority that's going to come from the water department, right about $13.7 million. Miscellaneous about 3.2. And the transfers, of course, for a total bottom line of all funds on the revenue side of about $25.8 million, and that is for fiscal year 18. That was what was budgeted. On the expenditure side for all funds for fiscal 18, again, personnel services, that's going to be the salaries and the benefits and all that kind of thing. Supplies, you see contractual services of about 10.6. capital outlay and debt service, the transfers out again balance out from the revenue side for a total of about $27.4 million inclusive of all funds fiscal year 18 expenditures. Moving on to the general fund for fiscal 18, our revenue, the vast majority of the revenue side on the general fund is going to be, as you know, on the taxes side. That's inclusive of sales taxes and property taxes at about $6.3 million, charges for services at about 1.6, miscellaneous a little under 1 for a total of $9.5 million that was budgeted in fiscal 18 for the general fund revenue. And there you see that graphically, the vast majority of the revenues for fiscal 18, and we're no different than any other city for the general fund. It's going to be on the taxes side, what you bring in, property taxes and sales taxes as well. So that's why when we're affected by sales taxes, when we're affected by property taxes, either to the good or to the bad, it really hits, it really affects the general fund in ways that we've all seen, either positively or negatively. Just a little bit more information about where we are in fiscal years, from fiscal years 14 through current fiscal year 18 on the sales tax side. You see those numbers and how they fluctuated a little bit. Remember in 16 we had 2 big months right around the spring and early summer of that. It kind of skewed our numbers just a little bit. It's real money that came in and that we did spend, but at the same time it kind of skewed the numbers to the positive just a little bit. And what we're looking at here is that graphic representation of the same table previous from 14 through 18. Now we're looking at an estimated final fiscal quarter on sales tax revenue coming in at about 1.2, and that takes us to this table here. Assuming everything comes in like it did for July, August, and September of this year, the way that it did in July, August, and September of 17, we're looking at that. So everything being even in fiscal quarter 4, we're looking at ending up somewhere around $2.9 million for the city portion on the sales tax side, where we did budget 2.85, if you recall, last year. That's kind of been our number over the last several years. If quarter 4 comes in like we might expect, we're looking at about a $64,000 increase over our budget, which is a good thing. Now, if quarter 4 comes in a little more, a little less, that number's going to fluctuate, but that's kind of what we're looking at conservatively at this point. Jumping over to the property tax side, you'll see some of the rates that were adopted for fiscal year 18, including Sweetwater at the 49.7. For some of our other comparator cities or sister cities in and around the region, you look at it, and every city is going to have a different reason why they adopt the rate that they adopted. Maybe sales taxes are so high that they can afford to adopt a lesser rate. Maybe they're lagging on sales taxes, so they got to kick that up again. There's a lot of debt in some of these cities, so their interest expense is going to go up, quite a bit to pay off that debt service. So there's just different reasons why these rates are the way that they are, but this is what we have to work with. Andrews is about 19 cents per 100 valuation. You go up to, and then there's a big skip between them and the Snyder, Stephenville, Sweetwater group, right around the 40s or so. Another big jump into the Colorado City, Graham, in the mid-60s about, and then you make another jump into the Abilene and Brownwood group, which are in the high 70s. Like I said, there's different reasons for that. Abilene has done a lot of projects, and they've had to raise their rates accordingly with that bond election that passed in, I believe about 15 or so. So a lot of those projects that are coming online, they're seeing benefit from, particularly in Abilene, with the water parks and the trail systems and those kinds of things. But correspondingly, there's an increase in the tax rate. And that's how they chose to pay for those types of things. So with the average rate of all of these, including Sweetwater's rate of about 56 cents per 100 valuation. So when you take these cities, we're a little bit below the average. Of course, Brownwood and Abilene kind of skewed, but so does Andrews. The preliminary appraisal roll, which came into us at the end of April of this year, when you look at tax year 18 versus tax year 17, this is where we are. You look at the net taxable value after you take out the exemptions, And again, I'll stress that word preliminary. We won't get final numbers until later in the summer. But this is where we are at this point according to the Central Appraisal District. That net taxable value has increased right now about $15.5 million from where it was in tax year 17. The tax rate in tax year 17 currently is 49.74 per hundred evaluation. And we're just assuming keeping that going into the next tax year. If you do that, just for comparison purposes, our tax levy last year, or in 17, was 2.225 million. Our tax levy, because of the increase in the appraised values at this time, would be $2.302 million. For an increase of the tax levy, that's the revenue that we get into the general fund on the property tax side of $77,280. That would be an increase, assuming everything stays the same. I can guarantee it won't, so that number will fluctuate, but this is the data that we have at this point. The preliminary effective tax rate, if you chose to go down to that, that would mean that that tax levy, $77,280, would go down to about zero. We would not see an increase. We would simply see the same money come in this year, or tax year 18 as came in tax year 17. So the $2,225,000, it would go back to that, and you will not see a net increase on the property tax levy. That's if you choose to go back to the 48,0728 number. On the rate, if you went up to the preliminary rollback rate, right now is about 52 cents per hundred. Anything above that would trigger a rollback election, and then you get into the politics of it. So we look to avoid that at all costs. I know the legislature has been talking, led by Governor Patrick, on these types of issues as far as what cities can do and what rates they can go up to without triggering rollbacks, or would be prohibited from going up to. So that's going to be, I believe, a big discussion as we head into the next legislative session. Pre-filing for those bills starts probably October, November of this year, and the legislature will kick off in January 19. So just kind of to summarize on the general fund revenue side, on sales taxes, our next allocation report will be due to the city Wednesday, July 11th. We'll continue like we always do, sending out information to y'all and interested parties. We get that information to see because they do rely really solely on that sales tax and what it does. So we'll continue to send out that information and monitor the impacts of sales tax revenue on the general fund, and really just want to encourage everybody here and everybody listening, everybody here who lives, works, and plays in Sweetwater to shop Sweetwater whenever you can, because that's the driver of our economy. Retail's a big part of it. We've got other sectors that do very, very well, but retail is not to be ignored. We need people to continue to shop Sweetwater. On the property tax side, the certified tax roll will be due to the entities, including the city, by Wednesday, July 25th next month, and the effective and rollback rates will be given to us or calculated by that same date. So we went over the revenue side on the general fund. What I want to talk now about is the expenditure side. There's, of course, the money you bring in, and just as quick as it comes in, you know what, it goes back out again. So on 1.1, 1.2 or so million on the general government side, public safety is always going to be a big part of that. At 4.6, I don't care any kind of home rule municipality, you're going to see about half of your general fund expenses go towards police and fire and EMS. Or police and fire in our case. That's just the way that it is, and it's good that we have you guys there to do that. That's a credible expense. Public Works is a little less than $1 million, and then you see some of those other functions there, for a total of about $8.8 million on the general fund expense side. That was in fiscal 18. This is how you see it graphically. You see obviously that about half of that goes to public safety, but thank God it does on the Public Works side. It's kind of the next bigger one, along with general government and some of the others as well. Here, we're kind of getting to the meat and potatoes of some of the discussion and some of the information that we wanted to present to you. These are some of the unanticipated expenses that we had in the current fiscal year of 18. The Seal Coat project, Mr. Mayor, right, we didn't budget anything for that. We couldn't because of the position that we were with the sales tax. we always said through the fiscal year, if we bounce back or when we bounce back, the first project that we want to look at putting back online was seal coat. So we thank you for sharing that vision with us and allowing us to do that, amending the budget and giving us that money to be able to do that. Luckily, we're in a position where we could. So that seal coat project went from $0 to $136,000 or so, which was a blessing. Election expenses, we had budgeted some amount. This is an amount that's over the amount that was budgeted in fiscal 18. We're over that by about $5,700. Just a reminder, we did have an election in November and then another one in May to handle the MDD issue, and that's the main reason for that. We did not budget for a new coffee machine. It kind of broke down on us mid-fiscal year, so we really had no choice but to go ahead and make that purchase. That was a $9,000 item that we took care of. The school resource officer, this is the second one that we just y'all just approved this morning. That $4,600 number reflects the remaining time that they would be employed this fiscal year, so the rest of the summer and into September. That reflects the 20% cost that we're picking up, and the school district is picking up the remainder of that 80%. That's why that number is relatively low. The part-time animal control officer that was just put online and approved by y'all last month. We haven't been able to hire anybody. If we hire them today, we're looking at that $4,500 increase expense on the general fund side through September 30th, and then October 1st, that number would jump to 16,000 or so, I believe, is what we budgeted, what we will budget for the full fiscal year in 19. But we haven't been able to hire anybody yet. So that number, if we don't hire anybody, that number's zero. If we hire somebody today, we luck out and hire somebody today, for example, that number is going to be about $4,500 for the remainder of this fiscal year. The track loader over at the landfill, you recall we did that, you guys approved that purchase a couple of months ago. We're at $284,000 on that. This non-electric project was approved within the last month or so. That's a cost of $297,000. That work should begin sometime in late June or early July with our facilities. And a garbage truck that we purchased from Snyder, a used garbage truck that we got, what we feel is a good value for that at $35,000. So that is, I believe that truck's been picked up and is out in service at this time within the last month or so. That was a $35,000 expense. That's really more on the refuse side, but I just want to throw that up there to let you all know. So these are some of the unanticipated expenses that we have. And every fiscal year is going to have something break down or some hailstorm comes through, whatever the case may be that you just can't anticipate. I know you all know that, but I just did want to point that out to you all with this slide. Heading into fiscal year 19, I want to take this time to plant some seeds as we look into putting the fiscal year 19 budget together. We have until, I believe, August, our meeting in August 8th, 9th, or 10th, whatever that date is, to hand that over to you. So there's some time for discussion on this. I'd really like some feedback on what y'all are thinking as far as some of these requests. If you have something that's not on this list that you'd like us to look into and cost out, please let me know. With some good time would be appreciated, so that we can see if we can fit that in, how we can fund it, see what it costs and those types of things. But we do want to start every year with the cost of living adjustment for all employees. We're looking at 3.3%, which has been our traditional number over the years with the setbacks that we had in sales tax last fiscal year and going back even into the prior fiscal year. We were able to do 2.5%, if you recall, on the COLA, and we were grateful for that, for certain. That's where we were at the time with our revenues. That's what we were able to do. I think things are hopefully a little better right now, and so we're going to shoot for that 3.3, and that's at a cost across the board, inclusive of all funds, not only the general fund, of $206,100. The pavement study, you'll hear about that here in a little bit. We had a visual inspection, what I'm calling phase 1. There were many of our thoroughfares and collector streets here in town that we own and maintain, not the textile ones, Lamar and Broadway and all that, but streets in town, collectors and thoroughfares that are our streets. And Some of those we may, over time, need to do a little more than just seal coat. Some of those may need reconstructions at some level, full depth or partial depth. We don't know that yet. We have some ideas about that, but we really want, with this phase 2 study, and phase 1 will be presented to you all here shortly after I'm done. But phase 2, we're looking at about a cost of $15,000 to proceed with that study, and just have a more in-depth look at, okay, we've identified some streets that we think are in some need of some type of rehab, but at what level, the base material, we need core sampling done on some of these roadways. What does the base material look like? Can it be salvaged? Do we need to start up from the bottom or not? Those types of things. So it's just a more in-depth type of study of our streets. I see our streets, a streets project moving on over a number of years, so that we don't end up like our friends and neighbors to the east one day. I think we've got to try to get ahead of it and stay ahead of it. Seal coat is part of it, but it's not all of it. It's not the end all be all. I think we're probably ready. It's probably the time to look at a higher level of maintenance in construction and reconstruction to a lot of our streets here in town. So that's what that would be about. The dog park, I just wanted to throw it up there just to kind of keep it in everybody's mind. It's a $51,000 cost. We talked about the grant that we're going after at this point. Hopefully we get lucky on that, but we're looking to build that with private funds. Hopefully that grant will get us that much closer to that. And we'll keep pursuing other grants even if this one is or isn't successful, frankly. The 4 officers that were requested by the chief and the police department for additional, at a cost of about $250,000. Chief Madden requested 1 additional firefighter at a cost of about $63,000. 2 additional dispatchers and police at about $105,000. A website upgrade of $30,000. It's been several years since we've looked at our website. It is the front door to our community. Folks that are thinking of moving their business here, moving their families here. Hey, I'm from Minnesota. I don't know where Sweetwater is. Let me Google Sweetwater, Texas. The first thing that pops up is our website. The way it looks now, it's not terribly impressive. I think there's some tweaks and some tweaking to that at a cost of roughly $30,000. I think that's a large number. We could tone that back down a little bit, but it's an important glimpse into our community. So oftentimes the first thing people see is our website. The ladder truck, a new one will cost 1.3. That could have positive impacts on our ISO rating. If we were to get a ladder truck, we've got several hotels in town that are multi-story, particularly the La Quinta that just came online not several months ago. And so we've always been looking at that. It's been on the list for a little while now. I think it's probably time to take a more serious, in-depth look at the need for that and how we could fund that, perhaps in fiscal year 19. A new one will cost us about 1.3 if we get lucky. A used one could come in at right about $500,000 or so. You're looking at a 10 or 12-year-old machine with considerable hours on it, but nevertheless, it'd be new to us. A brush truck at the cost of $200,000 for the fire department. An outdoor warning siren. We've had started a process where we would replace a siren once a year. Kind of ran into that financial trouble and put it off for the last several years, but we'd like to get back online with that project. 1 siren replaced out in the field at a cost of $20,000 once per year. An additional meter reader position, that's not general fund, that would come from the water or the utility fund at a cost of $43,000. I think there's a need for an additional one for more efficiencies and those kinds of things. Evidence storage and a dry safe at the PD, combined total of about over $13,000 or so. A chipper truck for $85,000 and these are all requests. I tell the staff, put it down on paper. Let's talk about it. It doesn't mean that we end up funding it or getting it, but at least it gets us talking about it and gets it on the table for discussion. PD vehicles and patrol times 4 at a cost of $177,300. You'd like to pay that in cash, but with our last group of vehicles, we did do that. We did get into some in-person debt on that. A PD vehicle for CID times 1 at a cost of $36,000. SCBA air packs, 6,000 each, times 3 for a total of 18 in the fire department. Drainage improvement improvements out in our system at a cost of, what is that, about $15,000 or so, that Russell, we wanted some discussion on that. Russell brought that up. I think it'd be a good project. Radar message board trailer, you've all seen them. You know, there are areas in town that people speed through, and there's kids that play in neighborhoods in particular, those things like that. You all have seen them in other cities. You're cruising along at 55, but the speed limit is 45 or something, and it grabs your attention. It shoots that number back at you and really sends the message you need to slow down. So something like that will cost us about $43,000 in additional service tech at the service center. It costs, it's another position, $41,241. And we did talk about it last Friday when Mr. Santee was here. If whether we decide to keep that language in the charter or not, about we need to have a comprehensive master plan. Whether we decide to keep it in the charter or not, I think it'd be a good idea now, at least to look at a comprehensive master plan for our community. That includes zoning, thoroughfare plans. It'll touch on parks and recreation, although we have a dedicated plan for that. Those kinds of things, annexation. I mean, it's really all inclusive of the types of planning that a city our size and above really needs, and we just don't have that. It would help us with a number of things, and we refer to make decisions based on that comp plan when things came up. If there's a zoning request, or what does the comp plan say about zoning in on that block in that area? So we just don't have that right now. It'd be good to look at about a cost of $50,000 is what we're looking at right now. Some of these are one time. For example, the comm master plan would be a one-time thing. You'd have to update it occasionally, probably every 10 years or so, 7 to 10 years. Some of these are ongoing costs, the positions in particular. Another meter reader, you add that to the water fund, and it's going to keep going. We're going to come back in fiscal year 2021, and that money's going to be in there. It's going to grow, in fact, with COLAs and all that, and as they go through. So some of these are one-time costs, one-time purchases. Others are ongoing costs into subsequent fiscal years. So there's a difference there. But the total for all of these are just a sample of some of the requests that we got in from the directors and myself. The total for all the requests in various funds is right around $2 million. So that just kind of gives some perspective. These are all things. I don't think anything on there is frivolous. These are things that we feel we need, but we also understand at the same time we can't do them all at one time. But what we can do is start talking about them, start thinking about them, and start planning on how, more importantly, we would at some point pay for them. So again, if you all have any questions about this or have any additional requests that you don't see on here that you want us to look into, please let me know.
How old is our current brush truck?
2007, too old. 2007, 2008, I believe.
And the ladder truck, it wouldn't be used on every call, would it?
Possibility of it being run on every structure fire. House fires, business fires, commercial.
If we had the need to call in a ladder truck, we're calling Ambulance, and they're taking, by the time they're deployed, yeah, it's going to be an hour. And you know that fire doubles every, I don't know how many minutes, but it's pretty quick. So you can see, something happens to one of the hotels or multi-story buildings in town, it's maybe a total loss at that point. Property, not to mention life, if not everybody's able to get out. So it's important. It would touch on our ISO ratings as well. I think we could see some improvements to the insurance rates that everybody pays in town, both in residential and commercial. So that wouldn't hurt that. It would only help. But again, it's new one's 1.3, and how do you pay for it? So that's kind of all this would be easy if money was growing on trees, but fortunately for us, it's not. But we've got to get creative in the way that we look at these things. With the police vehicles, we have been buying what we could cash, and that's always preferable. But the way the economy had been going around that time period, it was difficult, and we were skipping years without buying police vehicles. Meanwhile, we're putting more and more miles on our cars. So it was good to get y'all's support on getting into a little bit of debt on that, so that we could get 6 at a time. And So those are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about, thinking outside the box on how exactly to try to purchase some of these items and, or at least get them in the queue for subsequent fiscal years.
On the two dispatchers for the PD, are we having issues handling calls now? Is the volume of calls that high that?
We are, if you go by the state standards, we should have a minimum of 3 contact phone calls. And we're trying to do this. In fact, in the daytime, my secretary is going in there to cover dispatch on the live issues. And we've even looked at, are there off-peak times at which we could do power shifts, but our off-peak time is only a matter, our non-busy time is only a matter of about 2 to 3 hours. And it's usually between 2 and 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So up until that time, we're running, and then early in the morning, we're running it up.
And kind of same general question about the meter reader. I mean, we don't have more meters to read, but why do we need an additional meter reader?
Efficiency of the department, we're trying to get our meter, change out program back up and running, got the water loss. There's a lot of office work that needs to be done, like idle meters and zero accounts. We're trying to keep up with those. And the efficiency of another person being trained. We have one guy who's probably going to be leaving in a year or two. He's been here 20 years. And it's hard to get a meter reader with him trained. It takes about a year to really train a meter reader when he knows all the routes and everything. And also handle more customer complaints. We really bog down with customer complaints. It seems like it keeps our customer service a guy really busy, and it makes him kind of, how you say, bogged down with new services, disconnects and everything. That new meter reader will be helping with all phases of that department, and also being trained to maybe help out in the water office in times of need also.
How many do we have right now, meter readers?
We have actually 2 meter readers and a customer service supervisor. And the customer service supervisor, he's running around like a chicken with his head cut off about 8 hours a day.
So 2 people do the whole city?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
They're allowed probably 12 to 13 days to read those meters, and the other days of the month, we have maintenance, meter change out program, change the cutoffs, broken meter boxes, and then there's probably 3 days out of those 2 weeks there that we have to allow for cutoff day. You have a cutoff day, the next day you go back and make sure nobody's turning the water back off. And the day before cutoff day, you have to go out and see about some of the misreads or edits and make sure they're right before we send the bills out. So it's busy down there in the water office.
That's 4,500 accounts or so that we're taking care of,
Yes, sir.
10 square miles that we cover.
Correct.
And this, like, kind of just went to the total on there. There wasn't enough of space or time to really go over each request, but kind of threw the rest of them all into the total request number of a little less than 2 million. But we had other vehicles in various funds. We had small and large equipment in other funds that were being requested at this time to replace old and outdated and worn equipment. We'd love to give you all, if you want, a tour of the service center and take a look at the vehicles and the equipment that we're working with out there. It's an eye-opening experience. I mean, the guys are doing everything they can to keep that equipment up and running in the best possible shape, but at some point it's just gonna die, and we wanna be in a position where we can get ahead of that and not wait until that happens. The crews do a great job of working with what they've got, but we've got to take a look at that, at least on an annual basis, if not more. Are there any other questions about these requests coming in, or anything else?
Yeah, I have a question about the evidence storage and the dry safe. This is additional to what's already there, or?
Yes, sir. What this does is that there comes a time when
are the evidence storage and dry safe, are those things that were overlooked when the new police station was built, or is this needs that have come up since?
It's like everything, well, we looked at the dry safe, over a period of time, and due to budget restraints, we had to freeze some spending, so we did not acquire it. It's been budgeted, I think, at least once, if not twice, but we were able to make do with what we had at the time. The other one is forcing us to do things a little bit different in the business. It's falling into best practices. So we're required to change some things on how we do business. And so this allows for a cleaner transition of moving property back and forth so that we maintain the chain of custody within different facilities.
And you're also requesting 4 additional officers. How would you use those?
Well, this is something that we've been talking about for quite some time. We have an opportunity to work with the state and federal government to what they call a TFO position, or task force officer position, where they would be trained as somebody that's already in-house that has some experience that would go to DPS and go to DEA for the proper training as a narcotics investigator, and would work with them in Sweetwater, throughout Nolan County and some surrounding counties, to try and do something with this drug problem we've got going on here. The other officers would go to patrol. We are running literally call and call and call and call. We are not, unfortunately, we're not able to do any proactive enforcement. Just about 99% of our time is purely reactive, purely reactive. So that's what the number, that's why I said it.
And we're also, wasn't there 4 new vehicles too, police vehicles?
That was a request that was made,
Yes, sir.
Okay.
yes, for patrol, and 1 for CID.
Okay.
It's 4 marked units, 1 for CID. We do have, we're waiting to hear from the governor's office on when we can spend the money. We were approved through the COG for a CID vehicle, which will not be on there because it's gonna be grant money. But everything that we've been running in CID for the last several years have been forfeitures for stuff that we've been had passed down to us from the DA's office, and that well has remained dry. So those old vehicles we cannot sell at an auction. We have to question or scrap because they have departments that look at it, so that we can position of reselling those vehicles.
I'm noticing that there's not a request from the fire department regarding those. We looked at those gurneys, the new ones, or I don't know if that's the right term, that were demonstrated out here, and he didn't make a request for
I don't,
a couple of
was that one
those,
that
or?
came on?
Well, we have one that we purchased
For the new truck.
to go into the new ambulance.
Okay. And he had indicated, I think, that he needed 4 at one time to put them in all the ambulance. I may be in error in the
We'll take a
number.
look at that. It may have been in that kind of bottom line $2 million number. It just wasn't given its own rope.
And they were like, what, 70,000 apiece? Is that?
That sounds in the ballpark. You guys remember how much? 56, close to 60.
We currently have one, and then we have one coming in the new ambulance. The talks right now are that we're gonna drop down to a 3 ambulance, fleet, that we're doing away with the 4 ambulance. Because it basically just.
So one of the ambulances wouldn't have that top notch?
So we've got 2 right now, we'll have one that doesn't have one.
Okay.
And I don't know if he put that in the budget or not.
Can't recall, but we'll take a look at it. We'll go for the question. We'll make a note of that, Patty, and we'll get with Chief then.
Have those gurneys helped with the fireman's back and
They are much better than what we worked with in the past. And I think the newer systems, as they're rolling out, are starting to come out with the self-load systems where they're connected and all you do is push a button. But even with what we have now, seem to be better quality than the ones we've had in the past, even with the automatic lift on them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How are we on service vehicles? I mean, we purchased several new pickup trucks a couple of years ago.
Sure.
Are we in good shape there?
Russell, you wanna take that on? Question about our vehicle fleet in general?
We have some that's on the radar that do need to be replaced. We've kind of put those back because of situations. The last vehicles that we got was, replaced, one for me, one for Eddie, and then our trucks went back into the fleet for our employees. And so, but we do have a number of vehicles that do need to be replaced. We've got some 2000 models still that's in the fleet that we're using, and so those are coming up that already need to be replaced.
If we replace two of those, we're looking at $100,000.
Roughly, yeah, roughly 30,000 for each. We can do that.
Chief, are those radar message boards, that are, I guess that's on the trailer, so that's portable, that could be moved from street to street or
Yes,
site to
sir.
site?
And that number reflects actually 4 units. That would be 2 message boards that have the capability, have the radars on board as well. But they're message boards where we can actually go to and they have a computer on board, we type the message in there. And we can use it for whatever road closures, at the roundup. Even before the construction projects kicked off, we were having harder and harder time of being able to get a hold of TxDOT's message boards that were going into disrepair. So this would be able to be utilized not only by the PD, but also the other departments within the city. And then it's 2 radar-specific trailers that, all 4 of these units come with, our statistical packages. So it allows us to see what our traffic flows are, where our variables are at, and our peak times by which we can target that for enforcement at the local. And, I've also recently found out about a grant opportunity, so I'm in the process of trying to see if we might be able to qualify these units for grant funding, but I haven't received any information back. But we're looking.
Thank you.
With regard to tax rate, have y'all done any estimates at 50 and 51?
Not yet, but that's pretty easy to do, where we can plug those in any kind of numbers. What we usually do is calculate the effective rate and kind of work up to the rollback rate and then including the current rate where we are now, and just see how that affects our revenues coming in. But we can look at any number that you wish. But we'll kind of be looking at all of them, making a suggestion. I like the questions and the dialogue. Thank you for that. Is there anything that's not on any of these lists that you want us to take a look at? Or something that's on these lists that you want us to pay particular attention to?
The first one,
First one, yes, sir. Yes, sir. We'll do that.
because
For
I
sure.
think your employees are your most important part.
They're variable. I mean, we can't do anything without them. Very valuable asset.
And we need to give them the equipment they need to work with.
Sure. Good, okay. Unless there's anything else, and of course, we got a little bit of time, so if something comes up, feel free to give me a call and we can discuss that, cost out any proposals, additional information, or research you might need. We're ready to do all of that. The current fund balance, this is effective year-to-date as of the end of April. We're looking at the general fund, your beginning fund balance. It was about $4 million or so, and you're looking at your ending fund balance year-to-date through the end of April of this year at about $4.7 million. That's an increase of about $800,000 or so. You're looking at, what we have in the ending fund balance as of the end of April is 4.7. Our policy calls for, and it's pretty standard across cities, is 25% of your prior year expenses. That's what you want to keep in your rainy day fund, and so that equates to $2.4 million or so, and we have that and more. And so that last column, the above amount, the 25% policy, the 2.4. The amount above the 2.4 is an additional 2.3. And so that's where you add up the 2.4, the 2.3, that's where you get the 4.7, which is what we have as of the end of April. And so we're doing really well as far as our fund balance. It raises a number of questions. Is that where you want us to be? Are you comfortable with the 4.7 when the policy says you need to keep 2.4 in there? Is that okay? If it is, then we'll move on.
I like that to do a 6 month balance.
And we're probably right about 6, I guess, something like that. So if the 6 is the standard and what everybody wants to do, then we're right at that, and then we're good. If that's too little or too much, then we need to have that discussion. And any thoughts that y'all are having about this, let me know now, or we can talk about it later on. But either way you look at it, we're healthy as far as our fund balance.
Is the 2 million number, 2 point whatever, about 3 months? Is that what?
That's 3 months.
Okay. I thought that was the
expenses, yes.
standard practice for
It is.
most budgets anyway.
Yes, sir. It is, but
I think that's too little.
it's the policy and it's standard, but does it need to be 5 or 6 or 7 or 12? Then that's up to y'all. Whatever you want. The policy right now is 3, is that we've adopted our financial policy. Does it need to be 1 or 10 or 12? That's up to y'all. But we're approaching that 6 month number. We're real close to it, which is good. You'd rather be at 6 months than 6 weeks, I suppose. And believe me, there are cities that are there and are going to have a heck of a time trying to get their fund balances up. So the decisions that were made up to this point over time have been good because we are up to that 6 month, close to 6 month time period, and there's nothing wrong with that. Is that the policy you want to stay at? You want to look at something else, either higher or lower than about where we are right now? That's why I'm bringing it up. And that question doesn't have to be answered today, but just kind of planting that seed. As we move forward, there are there are going to be some unfunded items that we aren't able to get in the budget. A lot of cities will use the opportunity when they have a little bit of excess to do one-time projects. You don't want to fund positions with that because those dollars are ongoing and compound over time. But are there one-time projects that you might feel comfortable spending some of that fund balance down a little bit? That's certainly something that you could discuss and act on if you felt it was appropriate. If you're comfortable with where we are now, then that's where we'll stay. We need your direction on that, in other words. But that's where we are on the general fund. Water and sewer, we're healthy in our savings accounts for that. On the EMS side, we've got an ending fund balance at the end of April this year of about $1.8 million, which is relatively healthy in a fund like that as well, in my opinion. Unless there's any questions on this or direction.
On the water, are we fine on our bond payment schedule?
I got a slide on that, so we
Okay,
can
thank
talk
you.
about that. We'll get
Thank
into
you.
detail on that. Yes, sir. Fiscal year 19 budget issues, the impact of the sales tax, it has been going up over close to the last year or so, which is a blessing for our city. The year prior to that, it's been fluctuating, mostly going down. And so we're grateful for the uptick. We want to kind of plant the seed, and I think I did that, to review the general fund balance. Are we where we need to be? Do we need to make adjustments as a commission? What direction do you give the staff as far as seeing that go into the future? Review the property tax rate. We'll go ahead and do that. We always do. We'll look at keeping it at 49.7. We'll look at what the numbers look like going back to the 48 rate and up to the rollback rate. I wouldn't anticipate that we'd go up, but I think it's either between going back to the 48 effective rate and staying at the 49.7. I would suggest looking strongly at staying at the 49.7, even though that we have overall an increase in our values right now of about $15.5 million, and we'll probably go down after protests and all that before it's certified next month. But that would be my suggestion, but I'm open to all suggestions. We'll look at any kind of scenarios that you all want to look at and cost those things out. Extensive review of all rates, fees, and fines. It's not all sales and property taxes, and people pay for consumption. for sewer, for trash rates, fees and fines that they pay here in this court, those kinds of things. We sit down as a staff and take an extensive look at those and make any kind of suggestions as far as adjustments to those rates, either up or down. Continue to look for efficiencies with limited impact on services. And I was talking to the staff yesterday about this. When I gave this presentation a year ago, I didn't use the word efficiencies. It was more along the lines of cuts. Continue to look for cuts with limited impact on services. But I think we're in a better position this year, so we always want to look at where we can be more efficient without losing that customer service or without making a great impact on what the end customer, the end user receives from us. Unless there's anything else on the general fund, we'll move into water utilities. And that, I just want to take this time to, that's a picture of our wastewater treatment plant. A lot of times for a lot of people, the work that goes on out there is out of sight, out of mind. The folks that work out there really have a tough job. They work in a tough environment. Not everybody is set up to do that kind of a job. You ever seen micro with dirty jobs? Yeah, that's all you need to see about that. If you ever been out there, it hits you pretty quick. And so it's a tough environment to work at. It takes a special type of individual to be able to work out there and have the plant operate smoothly and efficiently and like it's supposed to. So just kind of a shout out to everybody that works out there. Eddie and Justin and your staffs out there, kudos to them because I'm not going to do it. And there's a lot of people that aren't going to do that type of work, but they do. And they keep things running smoothly and efficiently. And everything that goes down the drain is processed the way that it's supposed to in accordance with TCEQ rules and regulations and laws. And they make sure that plant operates the way that it needs to. It's a health safety thing. It's a life and death thing many times. And so they do good work out there, outstanding work out there. So please pass along our compliments to your staff. Just a summary of the water and wastewater fund for this fiscal year that we're currently in, budget fiscal year 18. On the revenue side, we're about 7.7. On the expense side, about $7 million. We do have close to $20 million in unreserved money in the water and sewer fund, and another 2.25 about in reserved money in the water and sewer fund. So that fund is very, very healthy. Look at water and wastewater fund revenues on the revenue side and other financing sources. The large percentage of that obviously is going to come from what we charge our customers for their consumption and to take their sewer away and treat that. 7.3 out of about 7.7 is the charges for services that all of us pay every month to the water and sewer fund for our consumption. The top 10 water consumers for fiscal year ending 17, you'll see the city of Ron at the top. That's a raw water. There's a contract and things are kind of complicated on that thing. I think we kind of get the short end of the stick, but that's the way it is on that. We have an obligation contractually to do what we do with the city of Ron, and that's on the raw water side, about 87 million gallons a year. And then you get to everybody else on the list is consuming potable water that we process here at our plant, beginning with USG, Georgia Pacific. A couple other cities, Roby and Trent School District is a big customer, about 12 million gallons a year. And the hospital kind of rounds out that top 10. Looking at the rates, that's important. That's what brings in our revenues and hopefully covers our costs plus some. We looked at the latest TML rate survey. There were 41 respondents to that survey. They cover cities between 10,000 and 15,000 population. On the residential side, 5,000 and 10,000 gallons. You look at that bottom line, the percentage over the peer group that we charge versus the average of the other cities. We're 22% over that average for 5,000 gallon residential consumption. We are 33% above the peer group average for 10,000 gallon consumption. As you know, our rates escalate the more water you use. You go to different tiers and you pay a little more. And that's the main reason for that. On the commercial side, for 50,000 gallon and 200,000 gallon consumption, you see the percentages over the peer group. 50 is about 28%. For 200,000, it's about the same, 33, 34%. Again, that's on commercial side. For wastewater, residential, you look at 5 and 10,000 gallon consumption, we're 35% over the peer group at 5,000, 21% over the peer group at 10,000 gallons consumption. And here's where it gets a little, here's kind of where it differs a little bit. It's on the commercial side for sewer. We're at 50 and 200,000 gallon. We're 10% under our peer group for 50, and 33% under our peer group for the 200,000 gallon consumption. That's all to say that we have, if we chose to, we have a little room to adjust the rates on the commercial sewer side. So we'll take a strong look at that and see where we might need to be. We might bring back somewhat of an adjustment, or maybe not. We'll run some numbers, and by the time the final budget is presented to y'all in August, we'll land somewhere, and we can have that discussion with you. Water and wastewater fund expenditures. On the expense side, it's a lot more even. You're spending about $9 million a year to get your water and wastewater brought in, the plans and processed and out, and all that, always complying with TCEQ rules and regulations, which never get easier over the years. They only get more difficult to comply with, which means increased costs for all of us. So you're looking at a total on the expense side in that fund of about $9.1 million, and that's shown graphically there. It's a lot more even distribution on the expense side in that fund. You'll see what it costs at the distribution plant, the source of the supply, what it costs to bill and collect that money, et cetera, et cetera. And Mr. May, you were asking about the COs in our debt service. On that, on the left, you'll see the description of the projects over the years when those COs were issued. When they mature, we've got one coming up in a couple of years in 2020. That'll get here pretty quick. And then the bond principal payables as of the end of this fiscal year, right on that far right column. So there's been a lot of work done on the water wastewater side to shore up supplies and to get us moving in the right direction as far as developing our well field and replacing lines and elevated storage tank and those kinds of things. So everybody's done a really good job on that over the years. Water is life, water is important, and it's reflected really more so on this table than anything else.
Hey, what are our interest rates on the bonds right now? I know we've refinanced them and to get the lower rates. So where do we stand on interest rates? Well, I think that was a good thing that we did when we refinanced them, because rates are now on the rise. And
We saved a lot of money with that last. I can get you those.
okay. Well, it's probably it's in the financial statement, I'm sure. I'll look it up.
Any other questions on water utility fund? And now we'll move on to other items of interest. And but to that airport, I mean that's community asset right there. There's a lot that goes through there. We're doing a lot of good work. Kirk and his guys have really done a lot to make sure we're complying with FAA requirements, with textile requirements, and the grants that come through there, the fencing projects. I mean, there's a lot going on there. That's another kind of out of sight, out of mind, project that we have out on the west side of town. But it is important and adds to our quality of life and particularly our economic. It's a tool for economic development. It really is. Just to have that airport. Not every city does, but we're fortunate enough that we do. On the EMS side, these are audited figures, fiscal year ended on these dates, 14 through projected 18. You see a lot of red on the left and middle of the column, but as we move towards the right, we're projecting to be in the black at the end of September 30th of this year. We'll see, and we'll get those audited figures out once we get to that point. But we hope to be trending in a better direction.
Does that include what Roscoe and the county reimburse us for?
It does, yes, sir.
Okay. We're going to be in the black?
Crossing our fingers on it.
That doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen very often, does it, on this one? So So we'll see how that goes. Of course, the figures still need to be audited and all that, and so that may change over that amount of time, but,
We're in the black, so we'd have to give part of it back to the county,
Rebates.
so we'd break even.
well,
wouldn't
it might end up at zero, I think, once it's all said and done. That's the projection for now, but I see where you're coming from. So that's that on the EMS side. On the employee benefit fund, we see it's a healthy fund. We do well. These always fluctuate when you're self-insured or partially self-insured. You can have a couple of good years, and then all of a sudden you get hit with a, God forbid, an organ transplant or something major like that, open heart surgery, those types of things. And then that takes, the fund takes a hit, but it's, like I was telling the staff yesterday, we all agreed, it's not about, the money is important for sure. There's no doubt about it. You can't do these things without the money in the fund, but it's there for the security of our employees and their families. They need to know that we're managing the fund such that if something catastrophic were to happen, that we're not going to throw our hands up in the air and say, well, sorry, we can't pay for that. You got to do something else. So that's why we pay such close attention to this, because it is about life and death and the health, safety, and well-being of our employees and their families, and that's important to all of us.
What's the cap rate? 40 or 50,000 per claim? 55.
Moving on to Hotel-Motel Tax, and I promise I'm wrapping it up here. You'll see that graphically kind of where we've been in 2010 fiscal. Kind of started to climb, and actually dropped, and then after that in 11 started to climb up. 15 and 16 kind of hit our peak, and then fiscal year in 17 we're about 613. We're hoping with some improvements made to some of the hotels and some construction going on, and that La Quinta especially coming online in the last several months, that as we move forward, those numbers will come back to 15 and 16 and levels, and hopefully exceed those. So it's doing okay, but we did take a little bit of a hit in fiscal in 2017.
Patty, is the one hotel that's habitually delinquent, or are they paid up to date now?
We caught up here, end of April, I guess it was May, that they finally caught up and we paid out they're 3 months behind. Then we had another hotel that went bankrupt, but they've already been bought out, and I think they were closed for maybe a couple of months, because I called, I didn't get any collections for it, and I called them, and they said they closed it so they could do some remodeling and stuff. So they should be strong now. I think May they said they would reopen again.
Well, you might ask your brother, that hotel-motel tax is not a dischargeable thing in bankruptcy, is it?
No.
Okay, I didn't think so.
But, that one hotel that had gone bankrupt, prior, and he was, our attorney trying to get us that, they quit paying, and I haven't been able to get anybody else, they changed their names, they, I guess, restructured some other things. I don't seem to have any leverage to make them pay that. That's key. And another attorney, I guess Mr. Santee too, but they just,
Are hotels not covered by the Bulk Trade Act, where all those taxes have to be paid?
I thought it was, but I don't know if they somehow got out of it. They only owed like another $4,000, or why they just didn't pay it, but they also have trouble paying current too, so. I had to stay on.
Okay, thank you.
It's real hard to get it's real hard to get into contact with.
And then to the budget calendar, we're here June 12th on the budget workshop discussion, and we move forward with the various dates. The bylaw we've got to hit, including the CAD. They've got to certify the tax roll on July 25th. They've got to calculate the effective and rollback rates at that time. We'll present the proposed budget to this commission during our meeting on August 7th. We'll have that budget document ready by then to officially hand over to y'all. And we'll start setting public hearings for September. In October, start publishing those notices, all of that. First reading, second readings on the tax rate ordinances, on the budget, on the revised budget, all those types of things. We've all been through that before many times. The second reading on the tax rate ordinance and final adoption of the rate will happen right now. That's what we're looking at, September 25th, and October 1st is beginning of fiscal year 2019. So at this point, that's all I had. So if anybody has any questions. If not, you know where to find me, gentlemen. So we'd appreciate any feedback on projects or rates or fund balances or anything that we presented or stuff that we didn't, stuff that we left off or forgot about. Just please let us know, and we're more than happy to have that discussion. Unless there's anything else, thank you for your time. We'll go ahead and get ready for Sage to do his presentations. All right, thank y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do what?
It was hot up here.
I think
You hit some
party's
apps.
fine, and here's
It's cool now.
the clicker.
It's either too hot or too cold.
Walking out on me already. Golly.
You get used to it.
All right, here are the handouts and a graphic or two. Some of the graphics that I included in the PowerPoint, they don't show up very well sometimes because of the scale on this plan sheet, so always helps to have it right there. Okay. What I'd like to do is run through an update on the pavement evaluation report that we generated. Obviously, paving is a big ticket item, and everybody wants a lot of it and wants the roadways to be nice, but it can be fairly expensive, and so I might ask a favor that you don't look at the last slide, which is a construction cost, until we get to the end. I don't want to lose anybody. There's some big, oh, Mayor's already looking.
Too late.
So, all right. The overview here, the purpose of the evaluation, we were looking at some of the highly traveled alternate routes that obviously Lamar, Broadway, those are the arterials through town, but some of the highly traveled alternate routes being Neff Street, First Street, Hoyt Street, those are utilized by local traffic extensively, and you know that they need to be in adequate shape. This was a visual evaluation. We did not do any subsurface evaluation. We looked at rutting, cracking, settlement areas, trying to identify areas where there are potential base failure. You know, and there was mention earlier about the seal coat program, and that's a great maintenance item, and it's highly intended to seal those cracks and extend the life of the pavement. A great investment. It needs to be done. A lot of times you target about every 7 years or so to recycle on the street. It's hard to do that. The cost adds up, but over time, the roadway will break down, and you'll have, if you get any type of moisture intrusion, you'll start having settlement, and you have potholes, and it's beyond the point of, you know, the need of a seal coat. It needs to be actually reconstructed. With that, also, you know, you need to look at the original intention of the roadways. A lot of these streets out there were not intended for the truck traffic that they get today. That just shortens their life even faster. With the visual inspection, we also did kind of a catalog of the existing utilities underneath these roadways that would need to be replaced. Obviously, we don't want to go out and reconstruct a brand new roadway and have leaking water lines underneath them. That would not be a good approach. So we wanted to inventory those. We've got a project area map, and then we'll get into the cost. And then it was touched on earlier by Mr. Vela about a phase 2 that is recommended for this level of study to include traffic counts, finding out what is the percentage of truck traffic and number of vehicles that are using these roadways, so that you can kind of rank which roadways may rank highest in being first met by replacement. If we could develop some type of cost-benefit ratio, that would be awesome. With that calculation, we also kind of need to know what material is below grade, what's existing, how much of that existing base material can we use. I've been told a lot of the streets, they used years and years ago, they had local available material. It's not crushed. It was big, kind of some, sometimes 3-inch larger rock and more, and it's not like the crushed limestone that we would recommend today. But then you got to figure out, do we go in and replace the full depth of it, or can we blend it? To know that, to refine those costs, we need to know what is there. So put together some costs for doing some cores and going out. Now keep in mind, this is a 15-mile total project area, so that's quite a bit of area, and that adds up. And it's 15 and a half miles actually. So we located the utilities, or identified what was found on maps, and so then the construction costs at this point are budgetary to find out kind of a 30,000 foot level. This is generally what this would cost. And I'm about to move into the cost numbers here. Oh, there's the maps, kind of the overall area, some of the major thoroughfares, that Alabama Avenue, Neff Street, Hoyt Street. I do want to draw attention over there to County Road 141, which receives a lot of truck traffic, and depending upon how the city approaches these repairs, that street may be something that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later, with the railroad crossing and the truck traffic. That road probably needs to be reconstructed. I'm sorry, it's kind of in the left over there, the bottom left. I can't get this pointer to work on there. On the handout map.
Right in front of ECM.
That's the one going across right there in front of
Broadway.
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay.
Right there.
Okay.
I noticed that label wasn't on there, but that one receives a lot of truck traffic and needs to get some pretty early attention, in my opinion. So here's the big ticket numbers here.
Did y'all do anything about the railroad crossing there? Because it looks like to me that it could sure be a high center kind of deal.
Yes, sir. That was included in kind of the recommendations of the report, that needs to be addressed. Right. Okay, so here are our 30,000 foot cost approximations. Trying to find a point to start from, and like I said, if we can get more information as far as existing material, how can we be efficient with spending the available funds, then hopefully we can refine some of these costs down. But you're looking at around a little over 16 million roughly on the estimated paving cost, and then the utilities associated with that was up to about 6. So there's always more to do than what we have funds for, and so some type of ranking system would be recommended. If we can come up with a cost-benefit ratio to help kind of rank and score those streets, that would be working with city staff. It'd be collecting field data, traffic data, and then just city knowledge and commission knowledge on which ones need to be ranked the highest, and then we can go from there. So it was discussed about maybe initiating at some point the phase 2 of this approach, so that we can keep this moving forward. And I know David had mentioned that, and that's something that to refine these costs and come up with a plan forward would most likely be needed.
Do these estimates include curbing?
No, sir. No, well, I take that back. There's certain sections of the roadways that do, right? Not all streets are curb and gutters.
Say, some of the roads, like that County Road 141, is there any chance that a road like that could be considered part of the trunk system, and we could get state help on those?
That would be nice. I do not believe that road would qualify. I mean, it's hard to get it's hard to get that funding, hard to get them moved into state funding eligibility. It's always something we can evaluate and look at, but I just don't know how that would be likely.
Well, that just, with the truck traffic, that just looks like that ought to be part of the trunk system.
Sure. I mean, we always can make that case. It's just I don't know how much success we would have getting that done. Any questions? Any further questions on these?
Something like the project of this magnitude, Sage, for us would be, we'd probably be looking at a phased-in approach. You do portions of the streets, or some of these streets in year one, and then in year two, another section over 3, 4, 5 years, maybe you get to all of them. Is that something y'all would look at to kind of
Absolutely.
prioritize and put us on a time frame, a time schedule?
Absolutely. If we can identify kind of that ranking system of how those streets are prioritized, we can come up with what type of budgeting the city would want to do, how big a bite each time, and then kind of break those out.
Yeah.
You know, there in that evaluation, we also could look at potential funding sources. Now, there's not a lot out there for roadways. I have been involved with a roadway and drainage project through rural development. It's all loan money. It's low interest loan money. There are a bunch of hoops to jump through, but that's about the only one out there that you can get some funding help on that. It's low interest loan.
Most cities are doing certificates of obligation or general obligation bonds for these types of projects.
Right, they are.
On the street side and on the water side, there's a different funding mechanism for that.
Right.
Okay.
All right, well, that's all I had on that, unless there's further questions.
If we don't do anything, what happens on these streets?
Well, you know, they will continue to fail. Like I said, once you have moisture intrusion, you have cracks start, you have moisture intrusion, then you have base failure. So you have potholes start. You will either have to start continually patching potholes, and then, you know, they get larger and larger, or you don't, and the streets continue to fall apart. They get to a point where you really don't have any choice but to fully reconstruct them.
If you didn't do anything, what, on some of the worst ones, what kind of time frame are you looking at before it's completely disintegrated or
Well,
unrepairable?
you know, that just depends on, like I said, moisture is the key culprit. How much moisture is getting into that base, how much base is there. It's hard to give you an exact number, but once the potholes start, unless you can seal off those cracks and keep that moisture out of the base, it'll just continue. It'll be a nuisance. You know, you start having complaints from citizens driving through the potholes and hitting those, and it just continually gets worse.
How long could you stretch a project out like this? I mean, that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
Money we don't have.
That's right. Not many cities do. How long could you stretch it out? That's a good question. I think, you know, we would have to, like I said, we rank the worst ones and figure out that cost benefit ratio. If you were to do all of them, I don't know, would you look at that over a 10-year period? I don't know, would you look at it over a 5-year period? It kind of depends on how you want to fund it and how big a bite that the city could take. That ranking system obviously would play in heavily on.
When you rank it, are you going to rank them by worst condition to best, or or a combination of travel?
We can
and
do it
worst to best?
however the city would like to do it. My intention would be, like I said, a kind of a cost-benefit ratio. You need to know which ones are most heavily traveled, right? I mean, that's the citizens are going to get the best benefit from the roadways that are most heavily traveled. Well, then from that area, from that category, which ones are in the worst conditions? And then how do those stack up against some of the other outliers that may just be falling apart? And so the first phase might be a combination of the two, where you have some that are falling apart, completely apart, and then you have some that are the most traveled. And you take maybe 2, 3, 4 of those streets and lump those into a first phase, and budget for that, design, construction. Meanwhile, you're starting to plan and budget for the other ones, and you're maintaining or keeping up with your maintenance on those other roadways at the same time. It's like you can't just ignore maintenance on the rest of them. And even in the roadways, the seal coat project, you had made mention earlier about how you hated to skip that a year, and you're right. I mean, it's critical to seal off those cracks and keep that moisture out of there. If you don't, then the roads fall apart that much faster.
Of those that you looked at, what's the worst road or worst street that you looked at?
I would say just because of the truck traffic, the 141 is the one that needs to be focused on early.
David, can you twist their arm at the highway department and turn that into a trunk system?
Carrots and sticks, I guess. Yeah, we can see what we can do. We can have that conversation with them. Very good relationship with them.
Anything else, guys? No? Okay, we'll now move into the utility update. Let me go grab my handouts. So these are copies of the slides, and then also these plan sheets that we've been helping to maintain a kind of a database of the well water levels, the static levels in the groundwater fields. All right, I'll hit on some of these items quickly, and some of them we'll spend a little bit more time on. Here's the overall agenda, kind of touch on the water supply status, the water protection, what we're doing, what the city's doing to help prevent water leaks and address those, the well field improvement projects, maintaining the wells and keeping them rehabilitated, status out there at Oak Creek, the membrane replacement, the update on the Water Development Board projects, upgrades at the wastewater treatment plant, and then future planning and water supplies. So over the last year, average demand or water use has been about 1.95 billion gallons a day. 80% of that has come from water wells, 20% has come from surface water. There were about 4 months during that time period that the surface water treatment plant didn't run. That was when the membranes were being replaced, and so more was taken from the groundwater wells, which kind of tweaked that percentage just a little bit. Here's a graph or a table of the rainfall data or the rainfall that we've gotten over the last year, and the percentage of the lakes. As you can see there, Oak Creek's at 46%. That's down from 49.5 in 17 and 53.4 in 16. The rainfall data, or the amount of rainfall is listed there as well. The graph of the level there at Oak Creek. You can see the trend when it started to recharge back in 15, 16, and then high point there late 17, and then trending downward into this year. A year ago, the Oak Creek level was about 8 feet below spillway, and now it's almost 12 feet below spillway. So we're due for some recharge, as we all know. Protection of the water supplies. Eddie's made the Water Utility Department's made a big push on fixing leaks. There were 45 in calendar year 2017. There's also an ongoing meter replacement project going on. There were 822 meters replaced in 17 of the inch and a half or smaller, and then the inch and a half and larger. There were 10 of those. That's critical. You know, there's still a lot of aging lines in the system, cast iron lines that leak, and finding those and reducing that water leakage is very important. Every year when we go through the water conservation numbers, I know Eddie, he's very diligent about trying to get those water loss numbers down. So, as we showed, the well field, as you guys know, it's a vital part of the city's overall system for water supply, and those well fields need to be rehabbed every so often. The wells don't continually put out the same amount of production. Over time, those fissures and those screens need to be rehabilitated to make sure they're fully open. Another process that we're going through with Eddie and his guys, they're taking good information on the drawdowns and the pumping levels of the wells. They'll put these actual mobile devices, but they register what the water level is at static and what during a pumping event, and then what we're trying to get to is a database to be able to see what that rate of recharge within the well bore is. Because if you can measure that over time and you compare it, that slope of that line will become flatter as the well starts to either silt in or become incrustations. The water is not flowing back into that well bore. Well, that's ideal indicator that it needs to be rehabilitated. So maintaining that database and comparing that information from year to year to year is where we're trying to go to a good well rehab plan. There's about $75,000 a year over the next 5 years planned for these well rehabs. That'll get about 5 to 6 wells per year. This is one of the graphs I mentioned. These are just the static levels. I gave you a handout which is better to see than what's there on that screen. Because of the scale, it just doesn't transpose well here on the PowerPoint. But this is a cross section that we keep of all of the well fields, and each year multiple times a year we update these levels, and so that it's tracked over time, so you can see where it was in the last several years, and it's kind of reflective as also of which well fields are being used. You'll see those levels go down a little bit more as compared to the other ones, and then they're given a period of time to relax and recharge. So it's a good way to monitor what the levels are in the well fields, and it also helps you to prioritize which ones that can be more fully utilized. So in a well rehab plan, the ongoing efforts will be either a chemical treatment or mechanical cleaning. Also at times there's pump and motor replacement, flow meter repairs, and electrical repairs that are needed. The idea for the well fields is to have a replacement of the SCADA system out there. So a lot of this monitoring and control can be remotely done. That's going to be part of the Texas Water Development Board funding project that's upcoming. That's in my opinion, that's a good way to monitor and record those data levels over time, and in addition to what the field guys are doing out in the well fields. I mentioned the Water Development Board project. The SCADA project is estimated to be $600,000. That'll replace the radios and the towers that are needed throughout the entire system and in the city as well. That'll be a widespread project, and it's intended to be bid as part of the other Water Development Board projects, which are most likely going to be ready for bidding in late summer and then move into construction. The membrane replacement on the Water Development Board project, 4 MGD of new membranes was completed and installed, and next part of that is to go through the TCEQ required lead and copper sampling. We'll touch on that here in just a minute. The elevated storage tank work continues between EHT and staff. The water line replacement, the next phases of water line replacement, where I'm estimating to begin in summer of 2018. We've already begun the design on that. I mentioned the SCADA, that'd be part of that, and then the chloramine boosting station out at the airport standpipe. The city has routinely had a lot of residual issues at times out there because of reduction in demand from out that far into the system. And so you either have to flush that, turn that water over, and by flushing, which is, can be contributed to additional water loss, or what is being proposed is a recirculation booster pump station or recirculation pump station that also has chloramine boosting capability. That design has been completed. It's being reviewed by TCEQ at this time, and then this whole complete plan set will be submitted to Water Development Board for their review as well, and also final review and concurrence by the city. So the membrane replacement, that went well. The original membranes, if you will recall, were put in 2014, so that's been about 14 years of service. Typically, those are anticipated to last about 8 to 10 years. I cannot commend the guys enough for the maintenance and that they've done on those membranes. They made them last a lot longer than they were intended to, and that just saves money for the city. It was a job well done. But there were some of the membranes were showing age, could not meet some of the integrity tests as well as they were desired by regulatory requirements. So we replaced 4 of them. If you recall, I believe that number was we had budgeted $1.2 million, and they were installed for $933,000. So there's cost savings there. But the construction on those went well, and they are in place, and I'm told everything is working well. So one item to note here is going into this process, we really thought the TCEQ was going to not allow the old membranes, the other 4 MGD, to be continued to be in service. We worked with staff and EHC worked with TCEQ. We were able to secure their approval to leave the other membranes in place. So we have partial new and partial old, and it seems to be working well, both of them working in conjunction. So that was kind of an innovative approach, and it saved money, and it preserved that treatment capacity as well. So it's still, the water treatment plant's still rated at 8 MGD, and then there's 2 MGD capacity at the well field.
Are those old membranes that were left in place, or are they're still working fine?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
We can, MITs, we do lower pressure tests on those that we do new. But maybe our last plan was another couple of years probably before we need to replace those.
The newer versions, which are the 500Ds, for repairs, the operators tend to like those a lot better because you don't have to take all of the membranes out, or the modules. You can get to just the ones you need to repair. Well, that's an improvement on the Ds over the previous Cs. So as I mentioned earlier, the final step to the membrane replacement project is the lead and copper sampling that's required by TCEQ. This came out after the items up in Flint, Michigan occurred. They want to make sure there's not corrosive water out in treatment system. So they really started making entities test more for lead and copper. And it's substantial. I mean, as you can see, that's going to be about $25,000 to $30,000 beginning in 2019 to get that testing done. I believe it's done over 2 cycles. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So just additional regulatory requirements.
Have we started testing for that?
We won't test until January 2019. We do lead and copper every 6 months, and water quality parameters we'll do every quarter.
And it's funded, completely unfunded.
Unfunded.
Thank you, Flint.
More information on the Water Development Board project. And this is one graphic I wish I'd printed out large scale. Hate it when you're walking out of the office and you think, man, I'm forgetting something. I had those printed out and I didn't bring them. But ultimately what I wanted to show here is the lower left-hand side is kind of a cross-section through the city of Sweetwater. And some folks may be surprised to know that there's 180 feet of elevation difference across the city. And sometimes in some areas it's more than that. But that is significant. Up, by the water treatment plant area on the southwestern side of town, and by the time you get to the northeastern side, it's 180 to 200 feet lower. That's quite a bit of elevation change. And so, as part of the Water Development Board project, we strategically put in these pressure reducing valves on the water system. Because of that elevation difference across town, by the time you get to the northeast, a lot of the existing pressures have always been 100, 120, even some of them up to 130 psi, which is less desirable in areas of older cast iron lines, and that leads to a lot of line leakage and breakage and repairs that have to be done. So these PRVs were strategically put in to step those pressures down, take some of the stress and strain off of those existing pipes. So here are the results. This is Haley Street, 14th and Haley. There were 3 PRVs put in along that main line. As you can see, the inlet pressure is 100 psi, and the PRV was stepped down to 75 psi on the outlet. You move down to the next one, 85 psi, and it's stepped down to 70 psi. The next one is coming in at 80 psi after being stepped down, and then the outlet of the valve is at 65. So those areas were historically 95 to 100, 105 to 115, and 110 to 115, and now they're seeing 75, 70, and 65 psi out in that area. So it did take some troubleshooting, finding some right valves to close, but getting that pressure step down was the goal, and those valves are working as planned. Now, one thing I will bring up that some of the public, it may take a little bit of education on the public's part, that they've always seen elevated pressures, high pressures. I mean, some of those areas 100 plus, and a more logical pressure range would be down in what those settings are now. I think this city may have received a couple of calls just questioning that, but I don't know that there's been that many, but have you noticed it in the house or out in the yard or
In the house, taking a shower,
okay?
big difference.
Yeah. Which there are some things that can be done on the private side, shower heads and all that stuff. But for years and years, I mean, if you're getting 100, if you're in this area, if you're getting 100 plus psi, that's significant. This is another area over near Alabama Avenue and Newman Street. This was historically over 100 psi, and that's been stepped down to the 65, 70 psi. So the whole intent, as we know, is to reduce the strain on a lot of the aging lines in those areas that are routinely breaking and causing leaks. And overall, a PVC pipe, newly installed PVC pipe, it has to be rated. TCQ says it has to be rated for a minimum 150 psi. Well, some of the older cast iron lines, they get brittle over time, and they can't take that. You know, a lot of these have been seeing 100 to 120, 130, and they've been okay. But as they get older and older and older, they tend to lose strength, and then they will become leaking problems and require repairs. The new pipage, the new PVC, it's not a concern. I mean, those types of the levels. Now, you still, did I misstate that? It is a concern. You don't want it. It's out of normal range to be that high. But the city has operated that way for a long, long, long time. Okay, a little update on the elevated storage tank. Works continuing between EHT and staff, developing a TM to kind of cover all the ins and outs. I know the city's going to want to review that, and then we'll go over it with the city, and then a proposal will be submitted for consideration and a path forward. The Water Development Board funding, there remains about $1.5 million of Water Development Board money, which we're proposing to utilize in Contract D. 600,000 go to the SCADA improvements, about 400 to 600,000 in water line replacement, additional water line replacement, and then we're right around 100,000 for the chloramine boosting station estimated. Here's some of the areas of water line replacement that are proposed. Now you'll notice there on Walnut, the north end of that graphic there on Walnut, we're hoping to be covered by the Cdbg project. There's a little bit of overlap there, but as you recall, we're going to get as much done with the Cdbg project as we can, that funds are allowable on that grant. And then once those are exceeded, then we'll pick up the rest of it with the Water Development Board project. But that's been a line that has been identified as needing replacement due to line breakage and leaks. Poplar and Hill, Patterson, Canfield, some on Hoyt and Alabama. This is, sorry.
How old are those pipes, say Walnut, Hill, and Canfield?
That's probably 1910, 1920.
Good money's out of
Been
it.
there a while.
Pretty wore out.
There's an overall graphic of kind of just across town where those improvements are going to be done, kind of widespread across town. We've touched earlier on the Cdbg water line replacement project. It is a grant. It'll replace the water lines on 5th and 6th from Poplar to Mulberry. And then also if we have funds available remaining, then we'll start addressing on Walnut from 13th going south. Okay, moving into the wastewater treatment plant evaluation that was done back in May of 2017. It identified some needed repairs or recommended repairs, and it ranked them and also gave some cost estimates with those. The evaluation is used to formulate the future budgets, and I know Eddie's been using those to budget the improvements out there. Among the CIP priorities that were identified, the UV component of the upgrade and replacement, various pump replacements, the mechanical component replacements, and then the SBR drains, which totals about $270,000. Some of that work has been addressed. The pump replacements, that's been accomplished. There's some photos there. But there's still several items that I know he's budgeting for on the CIP. This is the last slide, future water supplies. So we talked earlier about how important the well field is to the city's water supply, and it was recommended in the regional water plan that at some point, actually the GAM, the model that was done in conjunction with the water plan, but at some time additional water well fields are going to be probably necessary for the city if the city continues to grow. That is a long process, doesn't need to be done now, doesn't need to be done tomorrow, but the whole idea of that conjunctive use between surface water and well water is you've got to have surface area on your well field so you can move over here and utilize these wells while you let these relax and recharge. And the more area, there's spacing requirements that you have to meet, and at some point the city should be planning for additional acreage. I don't know how long that process took for the Hunter well field, but it was considerable amount of time. Just a thought, you may want to consider investigating that, or maybe appointing a designee on city staff to kind of be looking at that, looking at options. And then also at some point, if an area was identified, then you need to do test wells to prove up the area, and keeping in mind the Water Conservation District rules and regs on well spacings. That kind of helps determine number of acres that you would need. The Cedar Ridge Reservoir, we kind of gave you an update last year, and it's pretty much the same. It's going through the environmental process. The environmental impact statement, that's ongoing. The needs, purpose and needs portions of that, I believe, is going to be completed by September. So that's going through the environmental process right now. That's a long lead project for the region. The West Texas Partnership, that is a regional approach. Obviously, looking at water needs for the region and taking into consideration some of the other entities, Sweetwater being one of those, and we'll see where that goes as far as long-term planning. The brackish groundwater, that was a big hot button item there in legislature, and Texas Water Development Board has funded some studies trying to identify the brackish water in the state. From what I've been told, some of the studies they've done have not been as conclusive as they'd hoped. I think they're doing more studies, trying to identify locations and quantities and all that of the water. But as far as the regional plan goes, Sweetwater is identified as having the supplies and needs met in conjunction with the City of Abilene. City of Abilene is a wholesale provider for several entities. But in the plan, long-term plan, that was one that was identified as a planning strategy. So that's all I have for right now. If you guys have any questions or anything, I appreciate your time. I kind of went through some of those quickly, but hit on the main topics.
In times of drought, or like we're almost in, what kind of an impact does that have on the recharge of our existing wells? I mean, is all of our recharge local, or is it coming in from the outside the area, or both?
Well, yeah, there is some outside. Obviously, the immediate area provides more recharge in a more immediate fashion, but it does migrate from a greater distance. It just takes more time. Now, I said the type of aquifers that the city wells are in, spacing is critical, and allowing certain areas to relax and then come over here and pull on these wells, and rotating those wells and giving the other fields time to recharge. That's part of that overall game plan, and in conjunction with utilizing surface water when it's available. All right, gentlemen. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
You got it. Get out of here.
We done?
I thought we were here.